Hi, welcome to the Signature Leadership Podcast. This is where we watch world-class leaders uncover their authentic selves. I am here today with Stacey Copas. Stacey is the author of How to Be Resilient, is an international keynote speaker and facilitator on finding the opportunity in change and adversity. She's worked with leading organizations from around the world, and Stacey and I met a few years ago because we were part of a speaker mastermind group, an international group. We met in person actually just in Toronto before COVID, and we haven't really spoken since. I know we see each other online from time to time, so I'm really excited to jump in with Stacey today. Hi, Stacey.
Hi, Jamie. It's so good to reconnect after all this time.
It is. So thanks. So the way I'd love to start is asking you one question. Could you share a real problem, a challenge, or a possibility you are experiencing now that's top of mind?
Yeah, the biggest challenge I've been encountering is I've been really hesitant and quite bad on actually going all in on what I know that I have incredible value in. I have a lot of evidence of different, organizations and people I've worked with that love my work. But there's something that's holding me back from just going all out and putting myself out there as, the expert on resilience. And I sort of look back and done a little bit of beating myself up about, I've had all the tools, I've had all the resources, I've got, I've got the keynotes, I've got the workshops, I've got the book, I've got all of this sort of stuff. But I've been really bad at actually proactively promoting myself. And I've just really gone, I've done the work that's come to me, but I haven't been really good at going after what I know I can do. So I've sort of earmarked this year as a year of service to, I guess, set that intention. And I've taken some good steps towards it, but I still sort of plan, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And then something just holds me back on it.
So something's holding you back. What do you think the real challenge is for you regarding stepping up and confidently stepping into that place you can be as that leader? You talked about resilience, or that world-leading resilience expert. What do you think is the real challenge for you right now with regard to that?
Oh, look, it's something that I've spent a lot of time pondering over. And over the years, sometimes I think, is it possibly a fear of success? And I think that potentially, being Australian and being an Australian woman, the tall poppy issue is a big problem in Australia. So we've been really, brought up to not stand out, to not say you're good. A real culture of, trying to, I guess just to sort of say, if someone is doing well, then there's always that element of people trying to peg them back. And so I kind of feel part of it is that, but when I sort of get in my flow and when I'm actually doing the work, I love it so much. I know that's my space, and I know that I have amazing outcomes with my clients. So I think that's potentially part of it. And I think, possibly some of the other one that I've toyed with as well is, perhaps it's some of a bit of a money mindset issue as well. There, I will, get a couple of gigs. I'll have a, influx of good money. And then there seems to be a little bit of a barrier that I don't waste the money, but I just suddenly feel the need to invest in another coach or more training or those type of things, rather than, building on that and staying hungry and going after things. It seems to be that I sort of get to that point where I get comfortable and complacent and then not take that next step.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that vulnerability. As a speaker, I find this really beneficial to hear as well. When a successful speaker who I look to you, I mean, I've seen how well you've done, and that's my perception. So I appreciate when you're this open, because it helps people like me too. So what I'd love to do now is I'd actually like to look at your signature and your writing to see if we can shed some light on those challenges and see if there's questions that might come up to move toward finding some progress on them, if that's okay with you.
That sounds good. All right, now this is where I'll do my best to line up. It's handy to have the camera that I can see that. So I think is that in frame for you?
Yeah, it is. You know, it is a little bit blurry than we had before, but let's work with it anyways. Okay, so the first thing is, and I can really just see the strokes, and this is why handwriting analysis is fascinating, because I can't even make out the full last name in your signature. But the first thing I see in your signature is, if you look at your signature, if you take it back and look at it, we actually only see the S, correct? You write S and then you write your last name. So you might think it's symbolic, or this might just be by chance, but with handwriting analysis, if you don't write out your entire name, in this case your first name, that's sometimes, not all the time, this is just a quick impression, it's what you want the world to see, is you're not showing your full self. So even if it's just the placebo effect, what I heard you saying, and you could tell me if I'm wrong, is might be, because you have amazing self-awareness, a fear of success, a fear as an Australian woman of possibly putting yourself out to a global audience as the resilient expert or one of the leading resilient experts. And we might get into this later, we might not. In terms of your story, you are an extraordinarily, not just resilient person, but an inspiring person. So to me, there's so much to you that would give you the credibility and the authenticity to be a leader in this field, in this niche. But what I'm seeing with that S, just in that one trait, is you're confident. So if someone meets you, they're going to feel you show up. You have a charismatic, yet not over the top confidence in how you present yourself. Yet you stop before fully showing your true self. And I don't know why that is, but one thing I'm going to let you know in handwriting analysis or graphotherapy, which is by changing the strokes, you can make a positive impact on the brain. And some people, again, might think, well, where's the proof in that? I've done this. I've worked with people, audible narrators who had confidence issues, and I had this one suggestion that helped them, which is when we leave here, write out your full name. Even though it might not be relevant for a bank statement, when you're taking notes, just write out Stacy. Write out the full name confidently, slowly, and powerfully. And that's going to remind you, beyond that block, it's okay to show up with your full presence. Because the confidence is there, but there seems to be a gap between you have this confidence within you, and people who meet you, when that signature, they'll see a star-type quality. Because I see celebrities, when I've done Oprah's analysis and Beyonce, for example, people like that, they have that very large first letter like you have. And you also have a large letter in your last name, in the C, but it's not written out. And what will take you there is to remind yourself that you belong there, and to show up fully, and to keep going and not stop just before you reach the finish line. And one suggestion, can you go back to the signature again? Can we look at it again?
I can. And what's really fascinating when you say that is when I sign my books,
Yeah.
I sign just with my first name.
Okay. Well, that might be something else. When you sign with your first name, that is a sense of sometimes of humility and of relatability. So that's something else. But what's interesting in the last name, Copas, on the S, the S swings back to the past. Okay? And it swings back to the past. That can be that there's something, we can put it down for a second again. We'll go back up.
Yep.
When you swing back to the past, so the past is going backward to the left, and it's to your name. There's nothing an accident in handwriting. It's the projection of what's under the surface. That tends to be reflecting in the past. Something happened in the past, that is potentially part of this block that you're looking now and saying, why am I blocked now about wanting to play bigger? I don't know if I love that term, but wanting to step into your full essence. That trait at the end goes backward, and that tends to be you're thinking back. In that case, it's not all the way back, but I would say it could be a couple of decades at the most, not early childhood, but mid later. That's thinking about something that happened, and sometimes that is distracting you from stepping into your full presence now. So what I would encourage you to do is, even if you're not sure what that is, or even if you might think of what the obvious things that might be for you, when you leave here, what is that, or even now, what could that situation be where you didn't feel confident in terms of some of the things you mentioned, that fear of success, that stepping into your full self, even being an Australian woman and what that conditioning might have looked like when you were younger? Is there something that happened that might have planted this seed within you that has just subconsciously manifested in a way that maybe is not helpful, that by the time we finish, we're now in 11 minutes, within the next few minutes, you might be able to look at it and we reframe it and let it go?
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that, because if I'm looking back to that sort of period of time, so I'm sort of thinking the late sort of primaries, before I got into the high schooling and stuff like that. And for me, that's where, at 12 years old, that's where I actually had an accident that left me a quadriplegic and needing a wheelchair for the rest of my life. And so, to most, that would probably go, that's the obvious event. But for me, what I really feel, and I think tying into that fear of success, and I didn't realize this until probably in the last 5-10 years, is that I grew up in an environment where I never got told that I did a good job. I never got told that I'd done well, and I became incredibly competitive academically and athletically, because that was like a measurable way of going that I did a good job. But because I never heard it from anybody close to me, then, potentially I think that could still be. And I thought I'd sort of gotten over that bit. And I went through stages where I'd enter business awards and do all that sort of stuff. And then got to the realization where I had to ask myself, is this something that is right for me right now? Or is it 5-year-old Stacey going, Mum, Dad, be proud of me?
Okay. Well, and what do you think about that situation that might still be coming up today, and in some ways holding you back from stepping into what those around you see in you, and you probably see in yourself from time to time, but maybe not as consistent as you would like? What's the thought that comes up with regard to sharing this particular story or this particular situation?
Yeah, it's funny. There is an element of being incredibly vulnerable with some of these things, especially because it's like you're the resilient one, you're the motivating one, all that type of stuff. So there is an element of that, and I think also going back to something you said about not sort of fully sharing, is that I've recognised that over the years I get a lot of feedback around people go, oh my gosh, you're so real and you're so relatable, and you share so much. And then I realize I share a tiny, tiny bit, and then kind of feel like I haven't sort of almost told the truth, because I haven't told all of the story. So that's been an interesting one to sort of to think about, and I think that perhaps that might be a little bit tied into this as well.
Yeah. Now that you say that, let's look at your handwriting again. Now, we looked at the
Okay.
signature. Now, what I was
Yeah,
noticing before is the actual
yeah,
writing itself. So what the writing shows, and
yeah,
I like zoning in on a few things and a few themes.
yeah.
So
Okay. So
we're going to just,
direct me where to frame.
yeah, that works there. Okay. So again, I'm not sure what the audience sees. It's a little blurry for me, but I saw it originally. So this is a few things I'm seeing in your writing itself. Your writing itself is quite large and central. It's fluid, right? So you come across to other people as this adaptable, this nurturing, this supportive friend, partner. This is how people experience you. What I do notice is the actual angle of your writing is mostly up and down, meaning it doesn't really slant that far to the right, which would be expressing yourself emotionally. So what all that really means is, and if you pull it up a little bit, I'm going to pull all this together up higher. Yeah. So your actual S, right? So your S in your name is, it does slant to the right. So the writing is up and down, right? And that tends to represent someone who is a practical, objective thinker. So you don't make decisions from an emotional place. You make decisions based on a practical, objective, and a rational place. Yet your actual letter of your first name, it slants to the right. So you can put it down now if you like. So when the S slanting to the right shows this emotional side of you, this more emotionally expressive side of you, that in a professional setting as a keynote speaker, and from one speaker to the other, or whether you're a consultant or workshop facilitator, however it shows up, I would ask you, how can you bring more of that emotionally vulnerable person? It's not wearing your emotions on the sleeve type of vulnerable, but that S is showing me the way it's slanted. It looks like a musical instrument. So there's this musicality in how you might express yourself, right? Like that's really clear. That's a beautiful artistic component of how you show up. But I'm not talking about that so much. I'm talking more about that emotional expressiveness, which as in your job, in your career, that might be what is not holding you back, but I think people might want to see more of, is how can you show up emotionally expressive in your resilience? And you're the expert on resilience. What is it about? I'm going to ask you a question here to see if we can come up with an example right now, which is not easy on the spot. And that is, can you share a story, a real example of a time when you were resilient? What was happening? What did you contribute to the moment? And try to stay away from the ones you usually tell. Just like you
Oh,
talked
that's
about another example. What's one that your audience, if they looked at this clip afterwards and said, I have seen Stacy live. She's fantastic. She's inspiring. I didn't know that about her. Wow. That just gives me a whole different layer of understanding of how she shows up and how I can model myself after her in that way.
okay. Can you just remind me the specific question on that one?
To share a story,
Yeah.
a real example of a time when you showed resilience in terms of real emotional vulnerability and overcame something that was a challenge. Around that time, I'm going to add this one piece to make it even more of a magic trick. During that time of 12 years old, I think you said in terms of that time period, that was really tough for you. You overcame that. And what were the lessons that you took from it?
Yeah, I think the 12 years old piece would be after I had the injury, I ended up spending 8 weeks flat on my back with a sandbag either side of my head, pretty much staring at the ceiling. And yeah, I had a lot of time to think then. And it was interesting that the things that I worried most about were probably not the things that most would worry about. Like obviously I was worried about not being able to pursue a career dream, not being able to play sports. I was very athletic. But the thing I was worried most about at that time was my parents actually finding my journal. And then the first time I actually went home for a visit, the first thing I did was I actually went into my bedroom, I found the journal and I tore it into little pieces and threw it in the bin.
Mm.
And it was at that moment that I sort of I felt, again, it was hard because it was like ripping up so much of my past life, but I felt I guess a sense of empowerment in that moment, even though it was quite a traumatic experience. But I guess the fear of it being found and read was greater than than the experience of actually tearing it up. And so it was a really, challenging experience to do, and I haven't really spoken about that. And then I actually never ever kept a journal again after that moment until probably 10 years ago.
So how does it make you feel when you think of it now?
Yeah, I still feel it was. I did it from a place of strength,
Yeah.
in that it was at the time I didn't realize, I guess, how much it was kind of putting a closure on a previous life. But now I kind of feel that it was almost a symbolic saying goodbye to, who I was and who my plans were to be, and then going, okay, look, it's let's look forward now rather than spend too much time looking back.
Is that the takeaway, you think?
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it in that way until talking about it now. I sort of just felt it was, more from a place of fear at the time. But, now when I do think about it, I think, yeah, it was probably a little bit of, okay, that bit's over, and time to focus on what's ahead.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And I wonder, my final question leads in from that. Well, what if in moving forward, you told or you built in a few more of those type of stories, those more nuanced, smaller stories, but yet really relatable, that allow people to see these different parts of not just you as the storyteller, but also you in terms of how you show up emotionally and relating with you on that level as well. And I'm not
That's
saying that,
that's a good suggestion.
yeah, and I don't, and so that's a bit presumptuous because I haven't seen you live. I've seen videos of you presenting, but I wonder when people say they relate to you, I wonder if this gives them another part of you to relate to, is leave people feeling not just about the story, but feeling like they're closer to you and understanding where you're coming from will help them understand where they're coming from on an emotional level.
Yeah, I really like that. And I feel that potentially that's why I mentioned before that people feel that they really relate and connect with me, but I feel like I've only just shared a tiny bit. So I will definitely take that on board and experiment with weaving in a story like that story or a story like that, and see how the audience responds to those ones.
Yes, and I also love what you said at the beginning, if we come full circle, because to me, they also tap into resilience, the fear of success. So, could you tell a story about your fear of success? It doesn't have to be the fear of success we just spoke about. It depends, we personalize or customize to audiences. But you talked about things that people have to overcome. I know I have. I would love to hear a story of you. I love this story because I'm a speaker, so I'm saying, but if I was in your audience, your fear of success, how did you overcome that? How did you find progression? Because resilience, part of it is your progression of looking at how far you've come. And you've clearly overcome things that I haven't, so I don't understand the way that you see it, but how have you overcome your fear of success? How have you overcome the inferiority complex that you mentioned? Or you might still be dealing with it. And I wonder of resilience is an ongoing process, right? It's not you just all of a sudden feel you show up one day perfectly or enlightened. I'd love to hear more about, you talked about it as an Australian woman, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that, but this feeling of maybe not being good enough. How could you reframe that from a problem to a possibility that that is actually a strength, not necessarily inferiority complex is a, how could that be seen or reframed into something where it empowers you?
I think that's great because, yeah, and I'm just thinking even with a future audience I've got that, they're having to step up into a much bigger market as far as their thing. And so being able to then relate the fears I had about particularly becoming a speaker
Yeah.
was probably that one. And I still remember a mentor saying to me that I needed to share my story. Whereas I was like, I know I want to talk about I want to raise awareness of this volunteer project that I did in the Solomon Islands. I want to tell those people's stories. I don't want
Yeah.
to tell mine. And he said, look, it's again not about you, it's about your audience. And I said, no, look, everyone's going to think I'm a total wanker for talking about myself. And yeah, and then it was only after I did share my story on stage for the first time and realized how many people connected to it that I thought, oh my gosh, no, people didn't think that about me, and people actually took something from it. So I think being able to weave that in as well to, I feel that sometimes I go straight from the lowest of the low to here I am now and don't give enough of the pieces in between. So I think this has been really helpful to help me to sort of see where some of those pieces could be and how to sort of let people in a little bit more about how things actually felt and how I actually experienced them, rather than this is what happened and this is the takeaway.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I think that it might not happen in the next 5 minutes or so, but I wonder if by talking about these areas, which are not easy, right? Fear of success, or feeling inferior or not good enough, or feeling your confidence isn't where you'd like it to be. I have found, and I've read studies after studies, that that level of vulnerability people relate more to than the triumphs. And I wonder, it's not giving you trying to force a solution or advice, but I wonder if we speak again, if I asked you a year from now, if you did implement a few of these stories on fear of success and fear, feeling inferior, not good enough, or not feeling you have the confidence, or not understanding what that block is, by merely talking about these in the context of public speaking, if they don't resolve themselves in a way, because you're diving into the courage, even more than courage. It starts with courage to do it, but beyond that, it ends up canceling itself out because of going in front of a group of people, whether it's 5 or 5,000, and sharing about your fear of success, if that doesn't reverse it by leaning into it and dealing with it in that way.
I think that sounds amazing, and it is that type of thing, isn't it? I think that when we actually talk about some of the challenges and even just talking about them out loud, then so often they do resolve themselves. Or if we, talk to somebody else about some of their challenges, and we end up resolving ours in the process too. So I think that's a great curiosity to have.
Amazing. So what I'd like to do is end with 2 quick questions. If we're back together 1 year from now, celebrating your work, because that's what we were talking about, and how it's evolved and grown beyond what you could have imagined from this moment forward, what are the things that we're celebrating?
Well, we're going to be celebrating consistent 6-figure months. That's a big one. We're going to be celebrating the outcomes I've had for my clients and being really focused on, particularly I've been looking at the area of sales and the context of resilience in the sales process. So I will be celebrating with you my clients' results in them being able to smash their sales targets, especially in a very, very challenging market. And personally, it will be having that consistent confidence to actually go out and market myself and go after the work that I want to do and the clients that I want to work with. And it's so interesting that I talk about people being resilient in the sales process when I've been pretty bad at actually selling myself. So I think as I'm talking about, again, as we talk about these things out loud, I'm realizing that potentially, as much as I have gone into the sales audience because I love working with sales people and teams because they're driven and competitive, and you're not dragging limp bodies across a line like some corporate things that we need to do at times, that perhaps I'm doing this because I need to learn more about it myself.
Well, once again, relatable. And the last is a 2-part question. What's one action and awareness you can commit to take a step closer to what we just talked about? And the second part of it is, what did you appreciate about this interaction or conversation?
As far as the action goes, it's going to be actually writing out my when I'm signing, like obviously not when I'm signing my official documents, but when I'm actually signing my name and stuff, to actually write it out fully and just practice doing that and sort of owning that entire space. And that's one. The other one is definitely going to be implementing those more emotional and more vulnerable stories into my speaking. And what I've appreciated about this is it's beyond being able to reconnect with you after meeting you so many years ago in Toronto and having a great mastermind experience there. But I've really appreciated being able to see the links and in my handwriting. And I think you've nailed a lot of it about, how I actually am in a lot of things. But, to be able to then tie the handwriting into these practical challenges, like, my goodness, this is such a unique combination. And I really appreciate it. I do a lot of interviews, but this has just been probably the most unique one that I've done to date. So I really appreciate being able to have that experience with you.
Thank you, Stacey. And thanks again for your vulnerability and your thoughtfulness and insightfulness. I learned a lot from you too. And yeah, it was inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you.